Lord of the Mysteries audiobook by Kevin 811. The picture in the catacombs after passing through the door opening and going underground. There wasn't a sliver of natural light in front of Klein and Alger. The ceiling was intact, preventing any crimson moonlight from seeping in after penetrating the mist. Alger raised the lantern in his hand, lighting up the area up ahead with a limited dim yellow glow. Klein took a glance and discovered at least 6 stone statues of both sexes. They were entirely grayish-white in color, and even their clothes looked like they were engraved. These stone statues included elves, giants, and humans that had an ancient dress sense. Apart from their frozen expressions of pain and despair, there wasn't anything similar. Klein felt a chill down his back when he saw their eyeballs watching him without moving, having made the connection that they were once alive. He felt that darkness ruled the depths of this passageway, as though a terrifying monster had widened its mouth as it lay in wait for the two to walk into its belly. Reining in their stirring emotions, Klein and Alger remained silent as they passed through the grayish-white statues with warped expression, and they proceeded forward. After walking for more than 10 seconds, Klein didn't need to use Senner's night vision to see the damaged and dark murals thanks to the lantern. There were a few murals that were relatively intact, allowing them to recognize what was being depicted. They were no doubt focused on the cross that glowed and the grand figure that stood before it. This blurry and solemn figure either faced cities that had been flooded, stepped upon fractured lands, or looked up at the starry sky where it locked eyes with the pairs of evil and maniacal eyes. When the apocalypse happens, the ancient sun god will rescue the world. This is somewhat similar to the murals that Little Sun and the others found in the true Creator's temple, or perhaps it's just plagiarism from both sides, with no one giving up on working towards this goal. After all, it's to emphasize that they were once the Messiah and a deity worthy of one's faith. Klein quickly swept his gaze across the wall as he slowly entered the depths of the passageway. Alger was also observing the damaged murals when he suddenly suppressed his voice and said, "I suspect that the true fallen creator's description of himself has references to some of the content here. Indeed, everyone has the same views." Klein lowered death knell and chuckled. "I won't be surprised if we see matters related to the true creator up ahead. That might be a particular connection between him and the creator that the City of Silver believes in." Alger agreed with Jam and Sparrow's judgment. The duo continued ahead as they tried hard to soften their steps. However, there were still some echoes that reverberated in that extremely silent environment. At this moment, Klein's spiritual perception was triggered. He immediately took 2 steps forward and put himself in front of Alger, blocking out most of the lantern's light. Less than 2 seconds later, he heard a dull sound emitting from afar. Thump, thump, thump. The ground shook gently as the sounds became clearer. Then, Klein saw a figure nearly 4 meters tall walk out. It was also grayish-white in color, with armor-plating patterns engraved on its body. Its head had goat horns and a mouth that resembled a hound's, its half-opened mouth revealing snarling fangs. And what attracted attention the most were its pair of eyes which burned red and the 6 pairs of white membraned wings. Thump, thump, thump. The monster held an 8-meter-long stone trident as it slowly entered a passageway. It shook the land with every step as its great weight was spread out. Although Klein hadn't seen it before, he instantly recognized what it was. It was a 6-winged gargoyle. Its core crystal was one of the main ingredients of a marionettist, and the beyonder powers it possessed were extremely special and indefensible. Based on its external build, and from what it's made of, it definitely has extremely potent combat strength while not being afraid of most damage. All it needs to cause terrifying damage is to storm over and perform a downward smash with its stone trident. Klein relaxed his left hand and wasn't in a rush to react. He and Alger remained on the spot, one using his body and the other using his clothes to conceal the lantern's light. Thump, thump, thump. The six-winged gargoyle didn't look towards the duo, and it instead passed through the passageway, its footsteps slowly distancing themselves from them. Indeed, it's not very perceptive. It's no wonder Kalangos was able to venture deep down and return safely. Klein proceeded forward again when the footsteps were undetectable as he went past the crossroads. In fact, with his current strength and gear, and his understanding of his target, killing a six-winged gargoyle wasn't something too dangerous. Furthermore, the hanged man could provide him with help. The reason why he gave up attacking it was because he had no idea how many six-winged gargoyles there were in the catacombs. Once a battle ensued, any large commotion could result in them swarming over. When that happened, they could only escape using traveling. In addition, if they were to stir the existence in the ruins that even nearby Beyonder creatures were afraid of, the problem would only worsen. Curbing one's greed was a premise for a risky exploration. Alger was also rather pleased at the crazy adventurer's calm and rational actions. His suspicion was that Jayaman Sparrow was under the orders of Mr. Fool, thus resisting his urge to attack the six-winged gargoyle. The calmer he appears, the crazier he will be when he encounters his true target. As this thought flashed in Alger's mind, he followed Jayaman Sparrow straight down the crossroads. The murals on both sides remained damaged, and they were still describing the greatness and holiness of the ancient sun god. Finally, Klein and Alger arrived at the ends of the passageway. Here there was an 8-meter-tall stone double door. It depicted various symbols of death, sleep, end, new birth, and beginnings. A tomb, Klein turned to say to Alger. Alger nodded and said, it might also be a temple. Clearly, he was also wondering if it was both a temple and tomb. The grayish-white stone door before the duo wasn't shut completely. It was cracked open with a tiny gap that allowed a child passage. Alger glanced at the floor and walked over. Putting the lantern down and securing his dagger, he pressed his hands onto one side of the door. He slowly drew a breath as he bent his knees, his arm muscles swelling suddenly. Silently, the gap widened significantly. Klein pricked up his brows when he saw this scene, feeling somewhat astonished because the hanged man's pushing of the door didn't produce any sound at all. He didn't doubt an ocean songster's strength, but he didn't believe that it could prevent the stone door from making contact with the ground. As he moved his gaze down, Klein saw a pool of slightly sticky liquid gathered under the door. He quietly produced a lubricant effect. Mr. Hanged Man is very meticulous. Is this the power of a seafarer or an ocean songster? He probably also used the powers of a wind blast to control an air cushion, thus resulting in this door silently opening. Klein roughly figured out the reason. Although he approached the stone door, he wasn't eager to enter it. Through the widened gap, he observed the scene inside. Reflected in the eyes of the wraith was the corner of the room where there was a row of grayish-white stone coffins. It is indeed a catacomb. As for whether it's also a temple, it's an unknown for now, as Klein thought. He took out Leymano's travels with his left hand. On it were Beyonder powers that were suitable to handle matters related to the death domain. Meanwhile, he used a silver dagger to quickly create a wall of spirituality and sealed the iron cigar case to prevent Azek's copper whistle from causing the dead to rise from their graves. Alger also drew his dagger again and placed his left palm over it before sliding his palm outwards. Amidst light crackling sounds, the dagger swirled with silver bolts of lightning that snaked outwards. Having made their preparations, Klein, who was acting as the crazy adventurer Jayaman Sparrow, was first to pass through the door and into the tomb. Of course, Wraith Senner had already acted as a scout by circling the tomb before he entered. To a marionettist, there was no need to take risks on many matters once they had a marionette. The tomb's ceiling was soaked with water droplets, a clear indication of the humidity. The room was divided into two regions that each had 12 grayish-white stone coffins. In the middle was a circular region where there appeared to be a beautiful and complicated picture placed on the ground. Klein didn't approach it as he stopped Alger. Then, he controlled center to appear as it quickly floated to a spot above the circular region. Admiral of Blood, Alger's facial muscles twitched. Although he had already guessed so, he couldn't stop his subconscious reactions when he saw it with his own eyes. At this moment, Center descended and was able to fully take in the scene in the central region. The picture had dark, dull colors with the background being filled with blurry figures. In the foreground was a long table. On the table was a figure with a resplendent cross glowing from it, and surrounding the figure were three people shrouded in shadows. One was handsome and youthful, another solemn and bold, and the last looking wise with his white beard. The three pairs of eyes exuded an indescribable sense of evil, just like the actions of their owners. One of them had ripped off the figure's arm, stuffing it into their mouths, and gnawing at it as blood was filling his mouth. Another held up a brain and sucked at its juices, while the last had dug out a beating heart, chewing at it in a ravenous manner. In contrast to them, in the figure's chest was a long and wide crack. Sitting cross-legged in there was a dark and sinister infant who was masticating on the intestines that had fresh blood gushing down. These four entities seemed to sense someone prying into their act as they looked up in unison, as though they were staring at any being that placed their eyes on the picture. 812 myth from another perspective. Upon clearly seeing the picture through Center's vision, Klein's heart raced so loudly that even he could hear it. As a seer who was good at interpreting revelations and symbolism, he felt his blood gush to his head, leaving his head swelling. It seemed to prevent him from engaging and thinking deeper into it. Even so, there was an ethereal voice belonging to him that resounded in his mind. It was filled with alarm. That figure that's dismembered and eaten likely represents the ancient sun god, the Lord that created everything, the omnipotent and omniscient God which the City of Silver believes in. And I've seen the three evil figures surrounding him before. In the underground ruin in Backland, the place that sealed that terrifying evil spirit, they existed in the form of a statue but didn't look as evil as the picture depicts them to be. They each respectively represent the eternal blazing sun, the Lord of storms, and the God of knowledge and wisdom. Suddenly, Klein recalled the name he had once received, one that he had directly received when looking straight at the eternal blazing sun, White Angel. No way. Could it be that the eternal blazing sun was once an angel by the ancient sun god's side? Little Son once mentioned that they heard an ecclesiastic's penitence and prophesy of a matter in Afternoon Town. One of the sentences was, "The kings often came to the palace belonging to the dusk to conspire." The eternal blazing sun was originally named White Angel, which is also a king of angels, one that betrayed that creator. And he, and the Lord of storms, the God of knowledge and wisdom, and the dark infant who I have no idea what it represents had benefited the most out of consuming the City of Silver's creator. The Bibles of the various churches mention that the three most ancient deities were born from the original creator's spirit. In a sense, it's actually hinting at this dark history. If my theories are correct, then the Lord of storms and the God of knowledge and wisdom are likely the kings of angels that serve the creator, the ancient sun god who the City of Silver worships. Perhaps they should be addressed as Wind Angel and Wisdom Angel. This way, all 8 kings of angels are accounted for: Dark Angel, White Angel, Wind Angel, Wisdom Angel, Angel of Imagination, Angel of Time, Angel of Fate, and Red Angel. From what Little Son heard, and from the subsequent developments of these kings of angels, it seems that apart from the 2 sons of God, Ammon and Adam, the other kings of angels had betrayed the Creator. No way. This ancient sun god ended way too tragi. However, this picture might not be real. It might be sacrilege. It's still suspect. I wonder who the dark infant sitting in the ancient sun god's abdomen represents. It feels like the true creator is the greatest suspect. Klein instantly thought of many matters as he felt the urge to leave and pretend that he hadn't seen the picture the deeper he pondered over the matter. At that instant, he felt an irrepressible sense of fear, to the point of feeling that the eternal blazing sun, the Lord of storms, and the God of knowledge and wisdom were casting their gaze down from the astral world in his imagination. Who left this picture behind? Who could have known so many secrets and clearly be on the ancient sun god's side? One of the other angels or saints that have been constantly following the city of silver creator with enduring faith. Klein's back oozed with sweat as his body trembled slightly. Although Alger's observational abilities were inferior to Miss Justice, he was an experienced beyonder. In this environment that needed a high sense of vigilance and awareness, it wasn't difficult for him to notice that something odd had happened to Jam and Sparrow. "What happened?" he asked with a suppressed tone. Klein suddenly snapped to his senses as he made Center move his gaze away as he pointed at the circular region in the middle. "You'll know just by looking at it. A picture that can make Jam and tremble. Will it make me lose control immediately? It's probably not a problem since he's not stopping me but suggesting that I take a look. However, I cannot eliminate the possibility that he has already lost his reasoning and is just acting normal." Many thoughts flashed through Alger's mind, but ultimately he steadily walked towards the central region with his lantern in hand. After about 8 steps, he saw the gloomy picture. In just 3 seconds, Alger's hands trembled with the dagger and lantern in his grip. It was as though he was suffering from some kind of mental illness. Thanks to the world Jayaman, he had once seen the 6 Orthodox deities' anthropomorphic statues in the Tarot Club. He naturally recognized that the arm-eating, heart-tripping, and brain-guzzling figures were respectively the Lord of Storms, the eternal blazing sun, and the God of knowledge and wisdom. In the past, he had committed a disloyal act to the church whilst under Kalangos's coercion. He joined the Tarot Club and distanced himself from the chasm of storm, believed in Mr. Fool and wished to gain more strength and power, and he leaked the church's intel and was unmotivated in certain matters. Even so, he ultimately believed himself to be a believer of the Lord of Storms, albeit someone who wasn't devout and passionate enough. But at that moment, he felt deep down in his heart that he had committed a grave sin of sacrilege. He nearly dug out his eyes in horror. To not kill myself directly, it means that I really have become a false believer. Alger didn't dare take another look as he turned around and looked at Jam and Sparrow. With a trembling voice, he asked, "Those 3 are kings of angels. I can't give you confirmation. All I can say is that the eternal blazing sun is intimately connected to the white angel," Klein vaguely answered. As expected, Alger immediately felt that the possibility that the Lord of Storms, the eternal blazing sun, and the God of knowledge and wisdom were once kings of angels. As for Jam and Sparrow not being able to confirm the situation, he wasn't too surprised. It wasn't odd since he was only a blessed and not Mr. Fool. Alger was just about to say something when he heard a sharp screech. It was as though someone was using their fingernails to scratch the lid of a stone coffin. No, it wasn't an analogy, and it was exactly what was happening. Swing, rip, sizzle. Sharp, jarring sounds of scratching sounded from 3 stone coffins on both sides. Then the heavy lids were either flung open or blasted open as 3 warped figures stood up. One of them wore an ancient white robe that had nearly turned gray. Its face was riddled with pockmarks, and across its neck, forehead, and the back of its hands were deep eyes. Beside it was a figure with huge palms and thick fingers that looked as though they were made of wood. Slathered around its body was a layer of yellow-green pus, as a mist of the same color emanated out of it, seemingly capable of eroding away the stone coffin. Opposite the two was a figure in a tattered brown jacket with a triangular hat with a skull on it. Many parts of its skin had rotted away, revealing the bone beneath. Under its clothes and pants, thick and slimy tentacles that had fish scales embedded inside had burrowed out as it released a domineering, savage, tyrannous, and terrifying aura. This even made Klein feel as though he was facing a high-sequence beyonder from the storm pathway. However, its body didn't appear to reach that level. The three deceased bodies that crawled out of the coffin cast their eyes in the direction of Jam and Sparrow and Alger. One produced silver bolts of lightning that crackled. Another reflected the duo's figures in the countless eyes it had. The last one spread its yellow-green mist and created brown vines. At the same time, they stormed over with loud and hurried footsteps as a six-winged gargoyle was rushing over. Upon seeing this, Klein didn't panic. His Lemanos travels-wielding left hand reached into his pocket, tore open the wall of spirituality, and used 2 fingers to pick out Azek's copper whistle. Right on the heels of that, he flicked his wrist and threw the copper whistle to the other side of the room. Without any surprises, he saw the 3 deceased bodies with terrifying auras turn around and rush towards it like trained hounds. Upon seeing this scene, Alger's gaze froze before he made a decision. He threw his lantern and rushed for the door. His experience told him that while Jam and Sparrow could deal with the 3 terrifying deceased, he needed to hold back the 6-winged gargoyle to prevent it from interfering with the crazy adventurer's battle. Bang! Just as Alger arrived at the door, he saw the double door crack. A 6-winged gargoyle was charging in with an 8-meter-long trident. He immediately drew a gasp as his eyes burned with rage. His muscles swelled, and under the aid of the wind, he charged forward and brandished the dagger that swirled with silver lightning. Bang! He dodged the stone trident that smashed downwards, and he cleaved at the gargoyle's abdomen with a dagger. Instantly, sparks flew as rubble sprayed everywhere. Alger flew backwards as the gargoyle's charge was disrupted. Bang! Alger heavily slammed into the ground. As he had created an air cushion in time, he didn't suffer any serious injuries. And at this moment, the 3 deceased bodies had gathered together to vie for Azek's copper whistle. Klein looked at them and calmly flipped Lemanos Travels to a charred yellow page with complicated patterns and symbols. This was a demigod-level power that he recently recorded Lightning Storm. Then, Klein slid one finger across the notebook page with his death knell-wielding hand. At the same time, he looked at the 3 mutated deceased bodies who were vying for Azek's copper whistle. With a deep voice, he greeted them. Bye-bye. Amidst sizzling sounds, bolts of lightning burst forth, meshing together to form a hurricane, enveloping the region where Azek's copper whistle was, as well as the 3 deceased bodies. The entire tomb was instantly lit up like it was daytime. Even Alger nearly failed to open his eyes. His body instinctively trembled as a result of the terrifying aura. With the aid of the wind, he leaped up with the hurricane taking form in his eyes. He once again charged at the 6-winged gargoyle that attempted to attack Jam and Sparrow. 813, Tyran aside from the sailor pathway's raging blow, Alger knew that he didn't have any powers that were adequate against the 6-winged gargoyle's strong body due to its immunity to lightning strikes. Of course, directly creating a resonance with its hearing organs and body of heart, and mind through the use of his singing, was the most effective method. If this encounter had been anywhere else, Alger definitely would have exploited the gargoyle's great weight and lack of agility to circle around it. Then, as he sang to effect it, he would attack the same spot with sharp wind blades, slowly grinding away at his enemy through the cumulative damage over time. But now, he was in a catacomb, and due to the environment's limitations, Any acts of directly avoiding it would only cause the gargoyle to turn its gaze to Jam and Sparrow. It would then attack the crazy adventurer with its 8-meter-long trident, preventing him from seizing the opportunity to finish off the 3 deceased bodies. And most important of all, Alger suspected that his singing will have more adverse effects on Jam and Sparrow than what the gargoyle was capable of. Bang! The stone trident crashed heavily into the ground, blasting open an exaggerated crater. It left the catacomb shaking as if an earthquake had happened. As for Alger, he didn't attempt to parry it. With the help of strong winds, he dodged to the right and soared up, agilely dodging the gargoyle's attack as he dashed for the monster's head. At that moment, he saw the grayish-white eyes which burned with flames. Alger's mind turned sluggish as his body instantly stiffened. He had the feeling of being petrified again, but his skin didn't show signs of spreading grayish-white colors. Thanks to the inertia, he continued soaring upwards, but he wasn't able to brandish his dagger. He slammed straight into the gargoyle's head before loudly being repelled backward, his body aching in pain. The heavy grayish-white trident reflected in his eyes again as his thoughts were sluggish, making it impossible for him to put up any effective resistance. Suddenly, a hand grabbed him by the shoulder and pulled him to the side. Bang! Rubble flew as sparks were produced. The gargoyle's heavy trident had blasted open a huge crater again. Alger's body trembled as his vision regained its clarity while his thoughts were rapidly restored back to normal. He was like someone who woke up from an irresistible nightmare which he was helpless against as he regained control over his body. Only then did he realize that Jam and Sparrow had appeared by his side. There were still remnant flashes of lighting and sizzling sounds in the corner where the 3 deceased bodies were. Do not lock gazes with it. Attack its chest. As Klein pulled Alger away quickly in a bid to dodge the stone trident, he succinctly advised his companion. Alger had personally experienced and witnessed many battles, so without further explanation from Jam and Sparrow, he knew what the latter meant. He stopped receiving aid as he nimbly circled to the gargoyle's flank. Tap, tap, tap. He ran towards the gargoyle and waited for the stone trident to sweep over him, before soaring high up with the help of the strong gales to dodge the attack. Whoosh! Another hurricane pushed Alger towards the gargoyle's chest. During this process, he closed his eyes, pulled back his right arm and bulged his muscles. Then, with his ability to judge distances as a seafarer, he threw out his dagger-wielding right fist. Howling wind blades and sizzling lightning were emitted along with his fist. Bang! Alger's right fist heavily struck the gargoyle's chest, producing an explosive effect. It caused the gargoyle's stone to be covered in fine cracks as silver lightning snaked around. Following that, the cracks widened and depressed into a pit. With a cracking sound, his dagger exploded, turning into countless fragments that scattered everywhere. The strong recoil sent Alger flying back. In midair, he saw through the corner of his eye that the hatted Jam and Sparrow had at some point in time circled to the front and cocked his revolver. Right on the heels of that, the cold adventurer suddenly raised his hand and aimed the black barrel right at the gargoyle. Bang! Amidst a loud echo, a bullet tore through the pit in the gargoyle's chest and pierced it. Following the explosive boom, the grayish-white stone monster convulsed a few times before the flames in its eyes were extinguished. After a brief pause, it collapsed like a mountain, producing an exaggerated sound and earthquake-like shaking. Death Knell had delivered a lethal blow, and at this moment, Alger had just maintained his balance and found his footing thanks to the wind. Klein didn't speak to him or search for the spoils of war. He immediately turned around and headed for the charred area where Azek's copper whistle sat silently. Slippery tentacles covered in fish scales moved as the deceased body, with nearly half its body gone, had stood up. Bolts of lightning continued snaking around its body. It was the domineering, savage, tyrannous deceased body that wore a tattered brown jacket with a triangular captain's hat. It was missing its left arm and right leg, as well as having half its head. Its body was covered in traces of charred and melted flesh. But even so, it didn't sleep in peace. It was still attempting to fuse with the surrounding flesh and blood in order to obtain a stronger state. One had to know that Klein had used lightning storm, which he had recorded from the sea god scepter. Even if the act of recording had reduced its might, it was definitely the beyonder power at the demigod level. Just the fact that the other two deceased went silent without letting out a grunt was a testament of its might. This awakened deceased body is problematic. Klein's heart stirred as he made Senner leap onto the smooth surface of Azek's copper whistle before attempting to reflect onto the deceased fish scale on its slippery tentacle. At that moment, through the marionette, Klein sensed a tyrannical and high-level repulsive force. The wraith was unable to possess it. Senner was even repelled as it couldn't help but lose its invisibility. Upon seeing this, Alger didn't question the situation. He raised his hands and created a spiraling wind around the deceased body, hoping to restrain its actions. However, the wind didn't sweep inwardly, as though it was afraid of something. It was forcefully dissipated as it rapidly vanished. The only thing to be happy about was that the deceased body didn't immediately attack the duo. Instead, it jumped to the left, bent its back, and attempted to pick up Azek's copper whistle. Klein immediately flicked his wrist and precisely flipped Leymano's travels to the page with abyss shackles. This was a beyonder power which Emlyn had recorded, one belonging to a Sequence 7 vampire. As Klein swiped his death knell-wielding right hand onto the notebook, the shadows around the deceased body suddenly came to life and manifested chains that shackled it firmly to the ground. Taking advantage of his opponent's brief pause, Klein raised his revolver in a deadpan manner. Different colors, red, green, and white, immediately appeared in his vision. Aiming at the white, Klein pulled the trigger. Bang! A pale golden beam shot into the head of the deceased body, causing it to rupture immediately into a spray of blood. At the same time, the purifying bullet also emitted a sun-like radiance that illuminated the target's body. The deceased body melted like wax as it bent its waist and lost its balance, collapsing right beside Azek's copper whistle. Monsters without any intelligence that only move on instinct are much easier to deal with than beyonders of the same level. However, am I letting the copper whistle down? Ever since it was given to me, it has suffered explosions, the catharsis of lightning, and the purification of sunlight. Life sure isn't easy for it. Klein repented for a second before controlling Senner to pick up the ancient and exquisite copper whistle and stuffing it inside his body. He didn't directly head over, afraid that a deceased body would awaken. Hence, he continued letting Senner to investigate the fellow who could resist the possession effect. Klein suspected that the deceased had an item of a rather high level. Soon, Senner in his non-wraith form touched something and pulled it out. It was a card. On the face of the card was a man wearing a papal tiara with both hands held up. Before him were prostrated believers, and behind him was lightning, dark clouds, gales, and waves. Klein was very familiar with the man because he had a portrait of this person in another set of attire. It was Emperor Roselle, and to the top left of the pontiff-dressed Roselle, there was a line of text formed from resplendent starlight. Sequence 0. Tyrant. The card of blasphemy from the storm pathway. The tyrant card. Klein instantly recalled how the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom addressed the Lord of Storms. Tyrant. Alger also saw the card of blasphemy as his gaze froze instantly. Flames of greed flared up in his eyes. He took a deep breath and moved his gaze away as he looked to the side and said, "The battle was intense. Perhaps other entities deep inside this cathedral have been awoken by us. So, let's store away the things as quickly as possible and prepare to leave." "Mr. Hanged Man, do you think I'm not aware of that? There's no need for you to nag. What happened to our tacit teamwork from before? Heh, indeed. The tyrant card has affected you. You can hardly calm down, and you have become talkative, as Klein got Wraith Center to pick up the card of blasphemy and enter one of the deceased bodies to accelerate the production of the Beyonder characteristic. He coldly said, "You've already wasted 5 seconds." Alger was taken aback. Without saying another word, he walked to the remains of the 6-winged gargoyle and dug out the eyeball that glowed red. Then, he patiently waited for a moment and reached into its shattered back to extract a gargoyle translucent crystal. Elsewhere, with the Wraith's help, the deceased body that was covered with yellow-green pus produced a blob of brown soil. It had roots to it with hidden blood vessels. It appeared rather strange. Without wasting time to guess at the sequence or pathway it belonged to, Klein got Center to store it away before heading for the deceased body whose slippery tentacles were still twitching slightly, to accelerate the production of the Beyonder characteristic. Seeing what looked like a jellyfish with azure blue seawater in it take form, Klein and Alger suddenly heard a dragged-out sound. Sigh. This sighing came from deep within the cathedral, bringing along with it an indescribable sense of ancientness. 814 disappeared. The long sigh that sounded from deep within the cathedral had left the back muscles of Klein and Alger tense as they were pumped with adrenaline. Without any hesitation, Klein's left glove turned transparent as he vanished, appearing beside the hanged man. As he reached out to grab his shoulder, Center also picked up the jellyfish-like Beyonder characteristic, and with the help of Mirror Leap, returned back to the gold coin inside the iron cigar case. Right on the heels of that, Klein's and Alger's bodies turned incorporeal and invisible, leaving the catacombs silent again. The two of them were directly teleported into midair a distance away. Their figures came into existence amidst the shadows of the clouds and the crimson moonlight. Subconsciously, Klein and Alger turned their heads in unison to look at the primitive island, wishing to know if any changes would happen to it. When they heard that sigh, they had relied on their instincts and experience to immediately escape despite not sensing any actual danger. Now they couldn't help but feel curious and puzzled. In their vision, the thick mist that cloaked the primitive island had quickly dispersed. The moonlight shone straight down without anything obstructing it. Amidst howling winds, Klein and Alger floated in midair as they saw the primitive island's present state through the sparse mist. It had vanished. This primitive island that had a demigod-feathered serpent and all kinds of Beyonder creatures had vanished. The region it was in had dark blue seawater which was almost black, was ebbing slightly. Nothing appeared out of the ordinary. Alger couldn't help but reach his hand into his pocket where he touched the 6-winged gargoyle's core crystal that had left his mind sluggish. If not for his battle spoils still being in existence, he would have suspected if it was all a dream. He wondered if he and Jam and Sparrow had somewhat gotten lost, that they hadn't found the real primitive island, and ended up completing the exploration in their dreams. Klein had similar thoughts as well. He even felt as though he was hallucinating. After all, a giant island with so many powerful creatures that hid secrets from mythical times couldn't just vanish without a word. Even the seawater didn't show any corresponding signs of its existence. Thankfully, I didn't hesitate at all and chose to immediately escape. Otherwise, Mr. Hanged Man and I might really vanish, never to be found again. Klein suddenly felt a deep sense of joy. He didn't dare stay any longer as he activated traveling once again and vanished with Alger as they traversed the spirit world. And the final scene of this body of water that froze in their eyes was of mist spreading once again with increasing density. After another teleportation, Klein and Alger returned to the deserted island. They stood on a reef and watched the waves strike the shore loudly. Alger looked around and heaved a silent sigh of relief. He took out the core crystal of the 6-winged gargoyle and said, "This is a shared spoil of war. You get to choose first." After weighing the matter, He considered the six-winged gargoyle to be a monster that the duo had killed together. As for the three deceased bodies, they were solely jam and sparrows. Klein didn't directly respond. He made center float beside him as he took out the tyrant card, the brown soil bayonder characteristic, and the jellyfish-like bayonder characteristic. The latter was suspected to be that of an ocean songster's. After doing all of this, he said, "One battle, I'll choose first, thrice." He meant that in the battle the duo faced, they had fought three deceased bodies and a six-winged gargoyle. He had contributed greatly in the entire battle, so the spoils of war received in the tomb belonged to the pool. Of course, based on the contributions, Jam and Sparrow had the right to choose first and choose 3 consecutive times. Alger was taken aback as he gained a new understanding of the crazy adventurer. He then nodded. "Okay." Klein immediately reached his hand towards his marionette and calmly took the tyrant card with Roselle's face on it. "This counts as twice." With the card of blasphemy, along with the sea god scepter, he could barely be considered a fake demigod when taking action in his spirit-body state. This was also very useful when acting as sea god. Of course, the greatest value the tyrant card provided was the high-sequence potion formulas of the storm pathway, as well as the subtle ability to sense the ingredients needed after reaching sequence 4. And it was precisely because of this that Klein didn't wait till they returned to the city of generosity, Bayam, to split the spoils of war. He was afraid that the tyrant card would directly attract Sea King John Cotman. "It's up to you to say how many times it counts." Alger didn't retort, nor did he plan on objecting to Jam and Sparrow's claim. He watched as Jayaman reached for the jellyfish-like bayonder characteristic, which likely corresponded to Ocean Songster. To Klein, it could be used to create a mystical item in the storm domain, thus replacing the Murloc cufflink that had been taken away by Admiral Hell. It could also be bestowed to the Rorstad Archipelago's resistance in the future to raise their survivability at sea. Of course, the condition was that they had greatly pleased Sea God. Putting away the tyrant card and the jellyfish-like bayonder characteristic, Klein glanced at the hanged man, indicating that it was his turn to choose. Alger deliberated and said, "Can I choose the sequence 4 potion formula from that card of blasphemy?" "No problem," Klein nodded without much of an expression. "I'll give it to you in the future." Although the tyrant card had been activated, using it was bound to cause quite a stir. Therefore, to be safe, Klein planned on heading above the gray fog to study it after he returned to Backlund. All right. Even with Alger's stateliness, he couldn't help but smile. After this adventure, once his digestion of the ocean songster was almost done, he could showcase his strength and take the path of being advanced by the church. When the time came, drinking an additional potion wasn't a big problem. Even if he didn't give birth to a child, just time alone could allow him to resolve the matter completely. The key obstacle was that going from sequence 5 to sequence 4 was a qualitative transformation. It was a sublimation of life's natural order. Countless ocean songsters in the Church of Storms had worked hard for decades, but they had failed to obtain an opportunity. Alger didn't believe that he, as a mixed blood, one who had promoted himself from a servant, would receive any special treatment. He felt that not being ostracized was already something to be happy about, a result of his ability to build social ties. Furthermore, in the church, the potion was directly given for the advancement to sequence 4. There was no advanced understanding of the formula or its preparation. For Alger to gain an advantage in this intense competition, he had to have other ideas apart from being ranked within the top 3 in terms of contributions. His present line of thought was to kill a famous pirate. From him, he could obtain the cataclysmic Inter's potion formula. Then, he could let the clues point towards the mutated deceased body in the primitive island. It was likely a powerful pirate who had once been active at sea before suddenly vanishing. This way, the upper echelons of the Church of Storms would definitely suspect that this powerful missing pirate had obtained the card of blasphemy, and this undeniable reality could be verified via many different means. Alger could use the advantage of already knowing the cataclysmic Inter's potion formula to obtain a chance to become a sequence 4. Of course, that's working on the premise that the Church doesn't have a sealed artifact that can directly wipe out any corresponding memories. If this method doesn't work, and there's no real way to advance, I can only secretly gather the corresponding ingredients and prepare the required ritual for advancement. Once I become a sequence 4, I'll immediately leave the church and become a pirate king. Alger reigned in his thoughts and watched as Jam and Sparrow took away the brown soil-like bayonder characteristic. Glancing at the remaining items, he put away the grayish-white translucent crystal and handed the six-winged gargoyle's eyeball to Jam and Sparrow. With him not lacking any powerful offensive means, and him being well-rounded when it came to the sea and land, it was rather useful for him if the bayonder ingredient could be made into a mystical item. Back in the tomb, if it wasn't because he was uncertain if psychic piercing could affect the gargoyle, and the battle situation didn't allow for any mistakes, he would have chosen to first use the whip of mind. After splitting the spoils of war, putting them in different boxes, and sealing them with walls of spirituality, Klein stored away center. Reaching out his hand to grab the hanged man, their figures turned faint as they entered the spirit world. After the traveling was completed, the two appeared on a mountain beside the sea in the Bayam city outskirts. It was still close to the cemetery, and it was as though they had never left. Alger didn't harp on the topic as he nodded at Jam and Sparrow. If you need any mystical items created, I shall bear the corresponding costs. It's a pleasure working with you. Wearing the transparent glove, Klein tersely answered before vanishing. He left the hanged man behind, and he directly teleported himself to a secluded corner in Bayam City. Next, I need to select a lucky pirate. Klein surveyed his area as he muttered silently and stretched his fingers before walking out into the street. Of course, he didn't forget to change his appearance. He also smeared blood over Leymano's travels. After all, there were bounty notices everywhere for Jam and Sparrow, and see King John Cotman remained in this city. If he were recognized or got lost, things would be nasty. On the mountainside outside the city, Alger looked up at the dark night where there were the crimson moon and the countless stars. He slowly inhaled and exhaled, allowing the refreshing and saltiness of the seaside to cleanse his body. The exploration he had just completed was the most dangerous adventure he had ever had. If not for the teleportation from Jam and Sparrow's creeping hunger, he doubted that they could escape alive. However, as Mr. Fool's blessed, the world should have other trump cards. For example, those demigod-level bayonder powers in Leymano's travels. But in that case, we might not have successfully reached the tomb, with us encountering more trouble along the way. Yes, that card of blasphemy of the storm pathway is the target that made him restrain his madness. This was an instruction from Mr. Fool. He had already foreseen it. Perhaps he even knows the existence that produced that sigh from deep within the cathedral. Back then, Kalangos might have seen the tyrant card but had lacked the ability to obtain it. That must be why he said that. Alger's mind churned as he slowly walked to the foot of the mountain. 815 After Action Review Backlund, 160 Birkeland Street. Jam and Sparrow's figure suddenly appeared inside his bedroom as his black trench coat fluttered while his half-top hat remained straight. The Dwayne dance lying in bed immediately turned incorporeal, receding into a palm-sized mirror. Probably no one came tonight. Arrows didn't cause any trouble upon seeing the peace and quiet. Klein secretly heaved a sigh of relief as his body grew a lot taller and his sideburns turned gray. His blue eyes deepened as he transformed into Dwayne Dance. Meanwhile, watery waves stirred in the mirror as silver light gathered to outline words. Great Master, I didn't do anything today. No, I seriously acted as the sleeping Dwayne Dance. In addition, I encountered something. Do you wish to know what it was? Ignoring Arrodes's desire to be praised in its first sentence, Klein felt his heart skip a beat. As he took off his hat and threw it on the reclining chair beside him, he said in a deep voice, "Tell me." The words on the mirror disintegrated and squirmed into new text. A lady peeped into this house when she was walking past this street. How does that matter? There are plenty of people who admire the surroundings when passing by every day. Klein was just about to say something when the aqueous light stirred on the mirror's surface, outlining a figure. The person was dressed quite oddly in the eyes of normal people. She wore a spirit medium's black robe. Her eyeshadow and blush were blue. She looked beautiful, but she also had an uncanny appearance. She was none other than Dolly Simon. This lady had turned her head to look out as she passed by Unit 160 while on a carriage moving down Birkeland Street. She had stared out for more than 3 seconds. Man, she not only had an impression of Dwayne Dance because of his eyes, but she has also grasped something about the situation. Klein frowned slightly and asked, "Anything else?" "No." As Arrodes presented the word, it sketched what symbolized a sworn oath. Klein nodded and ignored the mirror's passion. He then sent it away. After doing all of this, Klein took out a candle and set up a ritual. He summoned and responded to himself, bringing all the spoils of war and his clothes above the gray fog. He planned on separating Jam and Sparrow's and Dwayne Dance's clothes. He didn't wish to miss out on any details in the future. Pa! He snapped a finger and made the candlewick burn with a scarlet flame. Flame! Flame! Klein's gaze froze as he quickly closed his eyes and turned around, his back facing the candle. Then he controlled Senner to approach the desk. During this process, Senner's body trembled violently, but he ultimately reached out his right hand to extinguish the fire. "I'll sleep for the night and think about it tomorrow. No, I have the Tyrant card on me, and it has already been activated. Although there's the wall of spirituality to seal it, it might not be able to fully screen out the attraction force from those of the same pathway. It might only weaken its influence and take more time. Back when I was in Bayam, I came and went quickly, without daring to stay too long. Just as Klein calmed down, he thought of certain problems. A few seconds later, he slowly took a deep breath, raised his hand, and snapped his fingers to light the candle. Following that, he held back the horror in him as he controlled Senner to take another 2 candles to set up the sacrificial ritual. This way, it skipped the step of him responding to the summoning for the entrance to the real world via the flame. After everything was done, Klein turned around with great difficulty as he piously lowered his head. Without looking into the candlelight, he seriously chanted the honorific name of the fool. Via sheer willpower, to the point of him bursting out in tears, he finally completed the ritual and sacrificed all the items, sending them above the gray fog. Klein exhaled, taking 4 steps counterclockwise. He arrived at the silent, mysterious space. Sitting in the fool's seat, he first picked up the Tyrant card, and he triggered the content hidden within. The card of blasphemy immediately became 3-dimensional, like a palm-sized book. As he flipped through the pages, each page had a Roselle Gustave. He was either playing the role of a sailor, or he was wearing a captain's hat and holding a sextant. Otherwise, he was singing loudly with the sea as his background. Klein was rendered speechless by this sight. He felt increasingly convinced that his fellow Earthling was way too narcissistic. "I'll be really impressed if the Demoness card also uses his image," as Klein lampooned. He read through the corresponding contents, analyzing the sequence names, ingredients, and rituals of the storm pathway. Sequence 9, Sailor Sequence 8, Folk of Rage Sequence 7, Seafarer Sequence 6, Wind Blessed Sequence 5, Ocean Songster Sequence 4, Cataclysmic Intera Sequence 3, Sea King. Sequence 2, Calamity Sequence 1, Thunder God Sequence 0, Tyrant. The ritual to become Tyrant, or in other words, the Lord of Storms, is very different from that of the Black Emperor. Firstly, it needs hundreds of thousands of followers to submit and believe in said person out of fear. Secondly, it is to challenge a true deity, in other words, another Sequence 0, and survive. Finally, in this atmosphere of fear and submission, consume the potion to complete the advancement. This sucks. A Sequence 1 who hasn't experienced a qualitative change is to challenge a Sequence 0 true deity. Doesn't that spell almost certain death? Besides, what if there's no Sequence 0 during that era? Then, wouldn't one need to think of a way to nurture one, or to switch to a neighboring pathway? Of course, the ritual might not be necessary. With enough luck, there's still a chance of succeeding by directly drinking the potion. See, God Calvatua was such an example. It didn't even consume a potion, but instead an unconcocted beyonder characteristic. The core of this ritual is the courage to challenge a deity, with massive feelings of fear and submission. Tyrant doesn't seem to come equipped with the Black Emperor's uniqueness of distorting rules, preventing him from resurrecting from the dead and returning from the void. However, it seems to be able to transform into lightning or light for a short period of time, perhaps capable of creating a planet-level disaster. Emperor Rosel's focus is on the formula and ritual. His description of the beyonder powers and deity authorities are very vague. Klein casually summoned a piece of paper that wasn't conjured. Using a fountain pen, he recorded the cataclysmic Intera's potion formula and wrote a note in the World Jam and Sparrow's style of speech. Avoid recalling the contents of that picture usually. This was a warning for the hanged man. In the mysterious domain, matters that involved Sequence 0 required caution and carefulness. Care needed to be taken even if it violated common sense. It didn't mean that seeing and discussing that picture on the primitive island meant that they were safe in the outside world. If they often recalled the matter, there might be a day when they were lucky enough to have lightning smite down at them suffering from an unresolvable conundrum that killed them with an aneurysm, or them dying from heatstroke from the sun's radiance. The ritual of the cataclysmic Intera is extremely dangerous. It will trigger earthquakes and tsunamis, and the advancer needs to consume the potion in such an environment, holding out until it ends. Klein folded the piece of paper and placed it to the side while putting away the tyrant card. After using divination to confirm that the three beyonder characteristics he obtained were separately the Black Emperor Pathways Sequence 5 Mentor of Confusion, Storm Pathways Sequence 5 Ocean Songster, and Planter Pathways Sequence 5 Druid, Klein finally had the time to recall what had happened during his exploration as he considered the information it hid. Eternal Blazing Sun is clearly of the Sun Pathway, and that city of silver creator is also known as the ancient Sun God. This can be determined from some of the fourth epic history and the murals of the elves. According to the law of sequence beyonder characteristics conservation, of having no sequence 1 when there's a sequence 0, the white angel back then likely wasn't a king of angels. But if he wasn't a king of angels, he had no right to partake in the feast of the city of silver creator. This not only has external elements in play, but it also includes the problem of jumping directly from sequence 2 to sequence 0, which has a high chance of losing control. Either Eternal Blazing Sun had switched pathways to become a god, or the city of silver creator's main authority wasn't the sun. After he defeated the ancient gods, he had already allocated parts of his authority to the angels beside him, making them become kings of angels. Therefore, the elves' murals and the name that eventually spread had only indicated that he once wielded authority over the sun, and that it wasn't an authority he held the entire time. There's also another possibility. The Creator, who took over the ancient gods' authorities, had the ability to allow a sequence 2 of the same pathway to advance to sequence 1. Klein's train of thought quickly turned to who had built the cathedral and left behind the mural. Due to the messiness of the various situations, he conjured a piece of goatskin, and he summarized all the points by writing them down to seek out the connection. That primitive island was discovered by Kalangos and Mr. Hanged Man. Kalangos received a mission from the Twilight Hermit Order. To obtain a priceless item, he headed to Baklan to assassinate Duke Negan, and he ended up dying at Mr. Azek's hands. Kalangos told Mr. Hanged Man that deep inside the ruin was a precious item that was in no way worse than Roselle's tarot card, but it was something that could only be obtained at sequence 5. He later obtained creeping hunger and became a pirate admiral, with a strength already equivalent to a sequence 5. That tyrant card remains deep inside the cathedral's catacombs. Kalangos didn't make any subsequent attempts, or did his attempts fail? That cathedral was built by an existence who worships the ancient sun god. The mural depicts the dark history of the true deities before the cataclysm, and is clearly on the ancient sun god's side. The Twilight Hermit Order is suspected to be established by the Son of God, Adam, with the goal of resurrecting the ancient sun god, the City of Silver Creator. That primitive island suddenly disappeared as though it never existed. Adam is an angel of imagination. Amongst the Twilight Hermit Order's core members, there's at least one angel of the spectator pathway, Hermes. The Twilight Hermit Order tends to select members of the Sailor, Reader, or Sun pathways. It has a high chance of possessing high-sequence ingredients and items from the Storm Domain. There might be angels from the Storm Domain in it. Klein lowered his pen and looked at the content listed out as he slowly made a guess. Thank you for listening to the story on KevinAudio.com 816, completing the transaction after listing down all the important points. Klein rapped the edge of the long mottled table and silently muttered, "The one who sighed in the depths of the cathedral is a member of the Twilight Hermit Order." Kalangos had caught the eye of the Twilight Hermit Order after he managed to venture deep inside. Later, he obtained an advancement and received creeping hunger, allowing him to become a pirate admiral. If that's the case, it can be understood why he didn't go to the primitive island again to take away the tyrant card after possessing the strength of a sequence 5. It's yours only if it's given. You can't touch it if it's not given. Of course, Kalangos might have established contact with that member of the Twilight Hermit Order during his second visit of the cathedral after possessing enough combat strength. Regardless, that primitive island must have quite a connection with the Twilight Hermit Order. The reason why we arrived at the tomb rather smoothly in the other zones and saw the picture of the kings of angels feasting on the Creator was because that Twilight Hermit Order member had the intention of letting us do so. They are happy to let that lost piece of history spread given the chance, however. Their depiction of something from their own standpoints might not be the truth as well. Later, that Twilight Hermit Order member probably sighed because he or she didn't expect us to quickly finish off the awakened deceased bodies and the six-winged gargoyle to obtain the tyrant card. With how things normally go, we should have been in danger, and he quells everything, talking to us from a distance, making us outer circle members of the Twilight Hermit Order. Klein carefully used he to refer to the existence in the depths of the abandoned cathedral. He even suspected that the person might be the former king of angels, son of God, Adam. Of course, he wasn't certain if the primitive island belonged to the Twilight Hermit Order. He believed that even divination wouldn't give him a certain answer, as there were too many possibilities. It also involved other hidden existences, and any information related to the spirit world would definitely be wiped away or hidden. If it's really as I guessed, does that mean that I missed the chance of joining the Twilight Hermit Order? If I pass their test, then I might be able to take a glance at the second blasphemy slate and obtain the high-sequence potion formulas of the seer pathway. What a pity. However, Jayaman Sparrow has a mysterious origin with a secret existence backing him. This is known by the various factions at sea, and as the most ancient and secret organization, the Twilight Hermit Order will definitely be aware of the corresponding situation. The outcome for Jayaman Sparrow would probably be immediate execution, and then having answers obtained via spirit channeling. Klein first found it a pity before feeling afraid. As his thoughts whirred, he even thought of sending the hanged man to the primitive island again and seek out an opportunity to make him an outer circle member of the Twilight Hermit Order, so that he could slowly reach its core. Sigh, but the problem is that the primitive island has vanished. Otherwise, Mr. Hanged Man really has a chance of being a triple, no a quadruple spy. Klein snapped his fingers and made the paper in front of him disappear, throwing the night's exploration to the back of his mind. However, he warned himself that he needed to pay attention to the appearances of any abnormalities in his daily life. He was afraid that it wasn't that the hidden existence deep in the cathedral wasn't able to stop himself and the hanged man from escaping, but that he had a deeper motive. If not for the gray fog and him having been sterilized, Klein even suspected if there were any hidden marks left on him. Glancing at the items on the table, Klein first flipped the Tyrant card over and placed it beside the Black Emperor card. Following that, he began considering how he would deal with the remaining spoils of war. He already had plans for the Sequence 5 Druid Beyonder characteristic of the Planter pathway, sell it to Frank Lee via the Hermit Catlia. But the problem is whether I want to accelerate the destruction of this world. Klein gave a self-deprecating laugh as he fell into a dilemma. Allowing a dangerous fellow like Frank Lee to advance to Sequence 5 meant that cows, fish, the sea, and rose bishops would be fearful. No one knew what this fellow, who was no better than a lunatic, would achieve in his experiments after obtaining greater powers. It was an unknown what sort of strange species he could create. What if he plants himself and obtains a bunch of Franks? The world would truly be in danger if that happens. Klein silently exhaled and planned on letting Admiral of Stars vex over this problem. After all, I'll just be selling the Druid Beyonder characteristic normally. Whether Ma'am Hermit wishes to buy it is up to her. Besides, it's only a Sequence 5. I believe Queen Mystic and the Moses Ascetic Order will support her and be able to ensure nothing goes wrong. Besides, the Church of Mother Earth has a bunch of saints, angels, and Grade 0 sealed artifacts, as well as a true deity. There's nothing they can't handle. As Klein consoled himself, he placed his attention onto the Mentor of Confusion and Ocean Songster Beyonder characteristics. His initial plan for the latter was to create a mystical item, but he wasn't sure if the artisan that the Hanged Man knew had the ability to do so. As for the former, he planned on selling it. Although it could also be made into an item, it overlapped with the Baron of Corruption inside the glove. Besides, Klein also began to realize that having too many mystical items wasn't necessarily a good thing. Particular negative effects were a pain when stacked. With creeping hunger and the rentable Laymanos travels, he believed that it was best if he traveled light most of the time. Under normal circumstances, creeping hunger matched with death knell, along with a few purifying bullets, it was enough to deal with most matters. When in a sea or air battle, he could have an additional mystical item made from an ocean songster. In complicated situations, he could rent Laymanos travels when given the opportunity. If there wasn't an opportunity, he could use Grossel's travels for defense and throw out the Fate Siphon charm. And this wasn't considering his own Beyonder powers, Wraith Marionette, or the hard-to-use Sea God Scepter. In terms of fixed assets, I'm considered a true tycoon. Klein sighed as he made the Beyonder characteristics fly to the junk pile. As for the eyeball of the six-winged gargoyle, this was a material rich in spirituality and had some hint of strangeness. It could be used in a ritual to create charms. Klein temporarily had no better use or requirements for it, so he had already thrown it into the junk pile. After doing all of this, he disappeared from above the gray fog, and he returned to the real world. On Saturday morning, Forz had originally planned on waking up naturally, but she ended up being awoken by the world's transmission via Mr. Fool. He was returning Leymano's travels to her. Forz rubbed her eyes and planned on directly preparing the ritual, but when she saw her messy hair and puffy eyes, she decided to wash up first to make herself look human. She had finally sold the two properties yesterday, selling them at a higher price than she had expected. Even after deducting the corresponding taxes, she had received £6,550. To her chagrin, gold coins which were used in daily life may appear common, but when she attempted to collect them en masse, she failed to obtain much. After plenty of work, all she got was 600 gold coins. Phew, I can finally repay the debt and complete the transaction. Forz combed her hair and began setting up the ritual. Last night, to celebrate her first time accumulating such immense wealth, she secretly drank half a bottle of Lanty and a barrel of Southville beer. This resulted in her waking up in a terrible state. During the ritual and after some communication, Forz paid £5,200 and 600 gold coins, closing the assassination commission and receiving an interrogator Beyonder characteristic. This way, she still had £2,530 in cash. As for the royalties from her two books, although they weren't much, they were relatively stable. After a brief wait, Forz saw the door of sacrifice and bestowment light up as two items flew out. One of them was Leymano's travels, and the other was a light blue, translucent hexagonal prism. In it were streaking bolts of lightning. Mr. World sure has many Beyonder characteristics on hand. Forz sighed silently and first thanked Mr. Fool before ending the ritual to accept the interrogator's Beyonder characteristic. Finally, she picked up Leymano's travels and flipped through it to see what additional Beyonder powers there were. As the pages flipped over, her gaze suddenly froze. This was because two of the charred yellow pages weren't empty. They were filled with mysterious and strange patterns and symbols. These represented Beyonder powers at the demigod level, a total of 2 pages. How extravagant, Forz couldn't help herself as she muttered. This was the first time she was seeing a demigod Beyonder power which she could freely use. As a best-selling author who mainly wrote romance, her first reaction was that the world Jayaman Sparrow was chasing after her. But thinking back to how they hadn't met before, and how the gentleman was a cold and powerful assassin, she quickly rejected such a guess. She believed that the world Jayaman Sparrow was probably able to receive help from a demigod at any time, so he didn't mind such matters. Phew, I should try not to use it. I'll let Mr. World use it when he rents it again, Forz exhaled with some fear, completely lacking the guts to take advantage of the terrifying assassin. After composing herself, she used her crystal ball and identified all the new Beyonder powers. She felt that they were all relatively useful apart from full moon. If I wish to commit suicide, this is quite a useful one, she muttered and closed Leymano's travels. She planned on giving Zio the interrogator's Beyonder characteristic when she returned in the evening. At 7 in the evening, Klein wore starched clothes as he waited at the foyer with butler Walter and valet Richardson to welcome the guests at his ball. Soon, he saw a familiar face walk over. Aaron Series. This famous surgeon walked to the main door while helping his pregnant wife. Pregnant lady. Klein's heart stirred as he walked over with a beaming smile. 817 guests as a polite gentleman, Klein obviously wouldn't stare at Aaron's wife. He looked at the famous surgeon and said, "Good evening, Aaron. How may I address your lovely companion?" Aaron's cold demeanor hadn't changed, but it didn't stop him from handing over an intricately packed bottle of red wine and say with a polite smile, "My wife, Wilma Gladys, a middle school teacher. It appears you are about to become a father again. When's it due?" Klein received the present and asked. The topic he had planned to cover when talking to Dr. Aaron had been about a few new surgery techniques in the papers, but he never expected him to bring his pregnant wife. This was a pleasant surprise for him. This was because Ma'am Wilma Gladys was expecting the unborn snake of Mercury, Will Ossipton. Aaron subconsciously glanced at his wife's tummy and said with a smile, "Early July. If you don't mind, I wish to invite you to his birth party." Just as he said that, the gentle and beautiful black-haired lady Wilma suddenly held her tummy and exclaimed in pain. "What happened?" Aaron asked in concern. "He kicked me, but he's calmed down," Wilma said with an eased expression. She then looked at Dwayne Dance and smiled. "Because of my pregnancy, I've been home all the time and haven't been to such balls in a while. Feeling pent up at home, I got Aaron to bring me along. Although I can't dance, I'll be able to chat with the other ladies, and I'll even find some time to play some cards." "Your presence honors me," Klein sincerely replied. "I will come for his birth party in early July." He wasn't affected by the tiny accident, as he still remembered Dr. Aaron's invitation. After exchanging a few words of pleasantries, Klein handed over the gift to his valet, Richardson, and got him to lead his three guests into the hall. Without needing to wait too long, he received his second guest. It was Bishop Electra, who was still wearing his black clergyman robe, and his female partner. His partner was a lady in her early 20s who still had a little bit of baby fat to her cheeks. She looked at everything with a sense of wonder, and she was filled with energy. However, she had an additional hint of maturity to her due to her already having a child. "Good evening, Your Excellency. My sleep has recently been excellent," Klein said, feigning ignorance of the Church of Evernight's secret efforts. Electra immediately tapped his chest 4 times in a clockwise fashion. "This is a blessing of the goddess." He then introduced his female partner. "She's my wife, Shona Johnson." As he often visited Dwayne Dance and had been to his residence several times, he didn't need to prepare any gifts for the ball. It would appear overly polite and too distant. "Nice to meet you. You are a lot younger than I imagined." Klein greeted Shona half politely and half jokingly with a nod. Meanwhile, he silently did the math. It said that the bishop got married 2 years ago. That means that his wife was only 18 or 19. This age difference is quite huge. In a few years, I might have to introduce a particular chubby apothecary to him. Upon hearing Dwayne Dance's joke and recalling the conversation back when he visited him while the former was sick, Electra immediately felt uneasy. He coughed gently and replied, "She's someone who likes a bustle. If she's free, she has no wish to miss any ball." Klein didn't speak further because he saw Ma'am Mary alight from her carriage and was walking over. After letting Bishop Electra and his wife enter the hall, Klein smiled at Mary and said, "Ma'am, perhaps we will be fellow workers next week." The lawyer and accounting team he hired had completed their investigations and had cleared the Coim Company's audit, and said that it was very suitable for investing into. Furthermore, he had already reached a preliminary agreement with the gentleman who was selling the shares. Final confirmation of the sale of 3% shares for £12,800 was to be made next week. When Mary heard that, she chuckled and said, "I already treat you as a partner." This seems to have a deeper meaning to it. Don't tell me that Dwayne Dance has caught your fancy. Klein's heart stirred as he feigned ignorance and reached his hand out. I hope for a pleasant partnership." After a shake of hands, he got butler Walter to lead the lady in. At this moment, more and more guests were arriving. Klein recalled the corresponding topics and warmly and humorously received them, receiving plenty of gifts as a result. If not for my instinctive ability as a faceless to remember a person's looks and characteristics, I wouldn't be able to tell who is who, much less find the correct topic to raise. It's no wonder that a butler's help is often needed at such times. As Klein was stirring in poignancy, he saw Member of Parliament Macht and his family arrive. He smiled again and took a step forward. "Good evening. Today's starry sky is especially beautiful." Member of Parliament Macht smiled as he handed a bottle of black rand from some unknown vineyard to him and said, "I've been in Backland for nearly 20 years, but the number of starry skies I've seen combined cannot even compare to the number I've seen this year. I hope there will be more with time." Klein then said to Ma'am Rihanna, "I heard that the both of you have gotten a boarding school for Miss Hazel." Rihanna looked at her daughter, who wore a cold expression despite maintaining a polite smile. Boarding school education is becoming increasingly popular. It's the same for females. And most importantly, perhaps Hazel will get to know more friends. Unfortunately, she doesn't seem too happy about this arrangement, as she can't bear to leave us. In Backland, boarding schools that targeted females of high society had already grown in popularity. The education they provided might not be better than home tutors, but it created a social circle. The school fees for such a boarding school like that was about £500 a year. "She probably can't bear to part with the sewers here," Klein lampooned. After a short chat, he let Member of Parliament Macht and family into the hall. When it was almost time, he didn't wait by the door and instead walked to the second floor. Standing behind the railing that faced the main door, he gestured for the musicians to pause the music. Holding a cup of champagne, Klein surveyed the surroundings. With all the guests looking at him, he loudly said, "I'm very happy that all of you can grace this ball with your presence. First, I'd like to thank the goddess, as well as you. I've prepared for everyone local music and food from Daisy, and I hope you will like it." After a simple speech, Klein walked down the stairs to the first floor, in preparation to invite a lady to dance the opening dance. Typically, a married host would definitely invite his own partner for the opening dance, while unmarried men or women would dance with a relative of the opposite sex, or invite someone they had their eye on, in an alternate form of a blind date. But Dwayne Dance didn't have any family or any suitable target, so this matter appeared somewhat embarrassing. However, he had an experienced butler. His butler had hired a socialite of high society, and although dancing the opening dance would result in some rumors, it wouldn't make others believe that they were dating. Therefore, Klein looked at the lady named Aurea without any guilt as he walked towards her. This lady was a widow who had good relationships with several people in Backland's high society. She enjoyed quite a status in this circle, but of course, she wasn't well liked by the ladies. Anyone with a bit of standing looked down on her. Regardless, Aurea's female charms and her bearing was excellent. It was especially so with her figure that had alluring curves. If it wasn't because her looks were only above average, Klein would have suspected that she was a demoness. "Ma'am, may I have the pleasure of dancing with you?" Klein followed the teachings of his etiquette teacher, Wahana, and posed flawlessly. Aurea with her blonde hair bun smiled and reached out her hand. "You are a gentleman that cannot be rejected." That sounds ambiguous. Her identity and the role she plays in social settings ensures that she can't act as demure as most ladies and madams. Klein held her hand, entered the dance floor, and began dancing under the tune of a village folk song. The aristocrats all had land, manors, and castles in the villages, and they spent several months a year there. Therefore, folk songs were one of the mainstream songs in high society social events. "You dance really well." If Wahana hadn't mentioned it before, I wouldn't believe that you weren't able to dance before. Oria deliberately leaned in close. As they moved in step, her breathing could be heard. As she was a stranger, Klein was a little uneasy by the close distance, but he couldn't push her away while under everyone's gaze, so all he could do was smile. I just didn't know how to dance such dances. In fact, I'm good at the kind of dances from Daisy Bay and the southern continent where there's greater freedom. I also like those kinds of dances. They are full of strength and passion. It's dance for yourself and not for others. Oria found a topic as she gyrated her body, appearing extremely intimate with Dwayne Dance. Towards the end of the opening dance, she said with a suppressed chuckle, "If it wasn't for the rumors, I would even suspect that you don't fancy women because you're a little stiff. However, I no longer have any doubts." As she spoke, she glanced down. Klein was actually rather embarrassed. She was really good at using her body and words to create a suggestive atmosphere. However, Dwayne Dance was an experienced man and couldn't admit defeat. He smiled with a natural expression. Stiffness is a result of not being used to Backlund's social scene. "I can teach you," Oria said with a chuckle. At that moment, the tune came to an end as she took a step back and winked with a smile. "You're really passionate." The words were a double entendre that left Klein nearly blushing. He even began to suspect if she was related to demonesses. He continued, wearing a stoic expression as he bent his back into a bow, and he sent Oria back to her spot. Through the corner of his eye, he caught Wilma Gladys, who was pregnant with the snake of Mercury, walking towards the long table to the side. Her target was apparently the first batch of ice cream. 818 Warning. Klein's gaze moved away from Wilma Gladys and looked to the pastries like carrot cake and cream puffs to the side, as well as the roasted poussin, stewed lamb, seared ribeye, daisy roasted fish, and the other food nearby. He gulped his saliva slightly and forced himself to retract his gaze as he prepared to invite Ma'am Mary for the second dance. As the host, he couldn't skip any of the first 3 dances, therefore all he could do was temporarily forget his hunger and the delicacies. And at this moment Wilma Gladys, whose pregnant state showed, walked to the spot where there was ice cream. She reached out her hand before retracting it. "You want some?" Dr. Aaron hadn't joined the first dance as he stayed by his pregnant wife's side. Wilma Gladys sternly shook her head. "No, I don't. I'm pregnant. It's not good to have ice cream. However, the little fella in my tummy seems to want a little, just a little." Dr. Aaron nodded indiscernibly and said, "Then have some. Leave the rest to me." Wilma immediately revealed an irresistible smile. "You spoil him too much." She didn't object to it as she watched her husband pick up a scoop of ice cream that had been circled with ice. After taking 2 bites, Wilma closed her eyes and suddenly shifted her gaze. She looked at a few ladies who hadn't participated in the first dance. They were chatting about something in hushed tones. They had smiles across their suggestive faces, often covering their mouths and laughing covertly. What interesting matters are they talking about? Wilma's curiosity was instantly piqued, and after informing her husband, Aaron, she walked over. However, the few ladies quickly dispersed as though they were awaiting the second dance. Wilma was disappointed as she asked the young, beautiful lady who remained standing there, "Do you know what they were discussing about?" "I'm not interested in their topics," Hazel said as she glanced at the pregnant lady beside her. She didn't fault her for being a little impolite because pregnant ladies often had some privileges. Only then did Wilma notice that Hazel, with her long black-green hair, was holding a cup of champagne. She looked like she had no wish to be invited to a dance. She has a sense of pride that stems from the bottom of her heart. Even when looking at Baronet Madams, she will only maintain the most basic courtesy. This is a delightful character, but the problem is that she's like that to everyone. She's overly cold and aloof, perhaps. She's in the rebellious stage that Emperor Roselle had mentioned before. As a middle school teacher, Wilma couldn't help but make comment inwardly. Then, knowing better, she opened up a distance from Hazel and began looking for the ladies she was familiar with. After completing 3 dances, Klein finally had a brief reprieve to stuff himself with more food and drink some thirst-quenching sweet iced tea. This was a day's specialty that he specially got the kitchen to prepare. Due to the influence of Death Knell, he had drank a little too much. After having a short conversation with Bishop Electra, he had to apologize and take his leave to the washroom. In fact, he could hold back for another 3 more dances. However, he felt that Snake of Fate Will Ossipton might have wanted to communicate with him, judging from his sudden appearance. Therefore, he found a suitable place without anyone around. Although he is an unborn fetus and came here passively, if he doesn't wish to meet me, he has 100 ways to stop his mother from heading out. In short, it's worth giving it a try, Klein mumbled as he entered the washroom and locked the door. Just as he was in a dilemma to deal with his burgeoning bladder or patiently wait another 2 minutes, his spiritual perception triggered as he looked at the mirror. At some point in time, the mirror had produced a black pram that was covered in shadows that prevented him from seeing any details. The only thing he could discern was that there was a child wrapped in silver silk inside. The child used a clear voice and said, "Your fate deviated a little." What happened? Klein tensed up immediately. Will Ossipton in his infant form scoffed and said, "You should ask yourself. All I know is that you likely met an angel." Klein immediately recalled his experiences on the primitive island and had a guess. After contemplating for a few seconds, he asked with a frown, "Can angels see my uniqueness?" "I've met Orange Light, and he said that only a few high-level creatures of the spirit world, as well as deities with certain unique authorities or beyonder who represent fate, can discover this point to a certain extent. Of course, close contact has to be made." In the pram, Will Ossipton sucked at his thumb and laughed. "Probably not, because you aren't dangerous. Besides, apart from you being unique, some items on you or your companion might have a similar uniqueness that can garner the interest of that person." Items on me, my companions. Klein's mind raced as he discovered that he might have been psychologically cued in the past, and along with the fact that he hadn't thought of it, he had missed out something. When exploring the primitive island, he had brought Grossel's travels along. This was a book created by an ancient god, the dragon of imagination, Anquelt. If that primitive island is related to the Twilight Hermit Order, be it the angel of the spectator pathway deep inside the cathedral with a high-sequence ingredient of the storm pathway, or the opposite, he will likely be interested in the notebook. After all, the leader of the organization is the angel of imagination, the son of God, Adam. And it's because of this notebook that I was allowed to take away the tyrant card while also preventing me and Mr. Hanged Man from continuing the exploration. Klein had a hunch as he asked, "How should I resolve this?" "There's no need. In the long term this should be something good, but there might be some trouble midway," Will Ossipton replied with a clear voice. "Furthermore, you are already burdened with so many matters. An additional matter wouldn't matter. I warned you so that you can take note so as to not be struck by trouble. Makes sense. One stops worrying when there are too many debts. Perhaps it might create opportunities and let my debtors end up fighting." On careful thought, Klein echoed inwardly. He asked instead, "My friend who wishes to obtain a drop of a mythical creature's blood wishes to know exactly what you need." "What do I need?" Will Ossipton scoffed once again. "There's plenty I need. For example, the means to accommodate the die of probability or how to finish off Ouroboros. If it's possible, you can take as many vials of blood as you want. But can it be done? If it's possible, why take the risk to finish off Ouroboros? Wouldn't it be easier to just deal with a weak snake of fate like you?" As Klein lampooned, he shook his head without a doubt. "No. Then think of something else. I'm not in a rush." Will Ossipton paused and said, "There's a very arrogant lady at the ball tonight. There's something wrong with her. If you have the chance to chat with her, you can lead the topic of conversation towards dreams. Hazel, dreams. Klein nodded in thought. Okay. Seeing that Will Ossipton had the intention to leave, he hurriedly said, "That paper crane is about to tear. How should I contact you in the future when I encounter an emergency?" Will Ossipton fell silent for a moment before saying, "Are you hoping that I can fold a paper crane for you in my mother's tummy? Even if I can, you won't be able to get it. If I have any desire to find you, and as long as you live here, I can do so at any time during dreams. If you have any emergency matters, just visit my father directly. After all, don't you have to wait when using the paper crane? All right, as a fetus who hasn't been born, I need to have more sleep. Let's leave anything else to the future." All Klein could do was nod and say, "If there's nothing else from you." Just as Will Ossipton was about to dissipate his body, he suddenly paused for 2 seconds and said, "Another thing." "What is it?" Klein tensed up once again. Will Ossipton dragged out his tone and said, "The ice cream your cook made is too sweet." Ah. Klein temporarily didn't react to what he was saying until the black pram vanished from the mirror. He then snapped out of his daze and couldn't help but twitch the corners of his lips. After settling the problem with his burgeoning bladder, he washed his hands and came out. He found Richardson and instructed, "Go to the kitchen and get them to lower the sweetness of the ice cream that is subsequently being made." Richardson didn't ask why, and he immediately did as he was told. Only when he was about to enter the kitchen did he recall the problem. Mr. Dwayne Dance hasn't touched the ice cream yet, so how did he know that it's a little too sweet? Towards this problem, Richardson quickly had an answer. He believed that a guest had informed his employer after sampling the ice cream. Although it was a little impolite, it wasn't something rare, especially among familiar friends. They would proactively and kindly inform him so as to prevent the host of the ball from suffering unpleasant critique. At this moment, as the previous dance was still happening, Klein wasn't in a hurry to consider a dance partner. He walked to the long table by the side and seized the opportunity to have some of the delicacies. Just as he selected a piece of dainty roasted fish without many bones, he suddenly saw Wilma Gladys lean over and pick up a cup of sweet iced tea. The lady nodded at the host and smiled. "This beverage is nice. I've never had it before. It's sweet iced tea from the South," Klein explained with a smile as he casually glanced at her tummy. "He seems to be very obedient." "Oh, perhaps it's a she," Wilma smiled. "Most of the time, but there might be some stirrings in the middle of the night at times." "Middle of the night at times? Don't tell me it's when he's replying to my questions." Klein suddenly broke out into a sweat as he feigned ignorance and cast his attention back onto his plate. As Wilma drank a sip of sweet iced tea, she headed back to her previous conversation. When the new dance began, Klein handed his plate and cup to an attendant beside him and glanced at Hazel. He slowly walked over and bowed with a smile. "Lady, may I have the pleasure of dancing with you?" Hazel fell silent for a few seconds and placed the cup of champagne onto an attendant's tray and replied politely, "It will be my pleasure." 819 GIF amidst a soothing melody, Klein and Hazel began dancing with their backs straight. One was tall and slim, and apart from the clear difference in age, their movements, demeanor, and looks were highly compatible. It was a beautiful sight to behold, one that could almost be used as a prime example for dancing. Klein took the initiative to break the silence. As they twirled, he casually said, "I often had nightmares some time ago, but thankfully I had the goddess's blessings. I prayed a few times at the cathedral and drank a few cups of holy water, and after that, I stopped jolting awake." Hazel silently looked up and after 2 seconds asked, "What kind of nightmare? To think you will be interested in such a topic. Will Ossipton was right after all." Klein replied with a smile, "I was being pursued by all kinds of monsters inside an abandoned, dilapidated cathedral. But you probably know, It's almost impossible to remember the details in a dream. I find it difficult to describe those monsters. Hazel didn't say a word, but her bright, brown eyes were colored with dissent. That also meant that she believed that dreams weren't necessarily impossible to recall. Klein took a step diagonally with her in his arms as he said with a smile, "Indeed, I've had a very clear dream in the past. Back then, I was still in the southern continent. I dreamed of an inverted mausoleum. It was constructed from pitch-black stone columns that extended underground. There were zombies covered in white feathers that appeared from them in a bid to pull me in. I had such dreams for several days, and it's really quite embarrassing. I was very afraid back then, so I frantically went to a nearby city and found a divination club. I got them to interpret my dream, and I received the conclusion that during one of my purchases of local goods, I had offended the faith of a tribe that believed in death. Strangely, when I went to the tribe to apologize, gave them gifts, and participated in their celebrations, I never had that dream again." He had fabricated the story from his experience as a seer. His goal was to pique Hazel's interest to see if she would unknowingly reveal something. At the same time, this was a suggestion with a deeper meaning, one that wouldn't garner suspicion. The deeper meaning was that Hazel could find a divination club member or a cathedral's priest to interpret her dream if she was troubled by it. It was best not to make rash choices while blindly believing the contents of the dream. When Will Ossipton mentioned that there was something wrong with Hazel and suggested chatting about dreams, Klein suspected that her dilemma stemmed from a dream that kept happening. Otherwise, it was hard to explain how, despite being at least a sequence 8, she had a severe lack of knowledge towards the mysterious world with her blind arrogance. Furthermore, she was a lady from high society who had been educated at home. Thus, it made it difficult for her to make contact with unaffiliated Beyonders or those without clear intentions. After all, her father was a member of parliament who was definitely protected. She likely had no lack of Beyonders around her. Therefore, Klein believed that Hazel might have made contact with something or had caught the fancy of some powerful Beyonder due to her personality. Through dreams, she was slowly guided to become a Beyonder, without giving her the necessary knowledge. At the same time, the entity enticed her to dig in the sewers to search for something. There were two reasons that solidified his theory. Firstly, it was because of Will Ossipton's words. Secondly, Sequence 5 of the Marauder pathway was Dream Stealer. It was impossible that it only had the one Beyonder power of stealing the intent behind an action. Hazel quietly listened to Dwayne Dance's description as her mouth subconsciously gaped before closing again. After nearly 10 seconds, she asked, "Why didn't you head to the goddess's cathedral?" As expected, she's reacting to topics about dreams. However, she's quite careful and doesn't divulge anything. Klein smiled wryly and said, "There weren't any cathedrals of the goddess around. It was a region that held faith in the god of steam and machinery." Hazel didn't continue the topic as she focused her attention back onto the dance, as though she was fully immersed in the music. Klein also quietened down as he swirled around in the beautiful melody with the girl. After the dance, he sent Hazel back to where she was standing, and then he headed for the long table due to his thirst, hoping to get a cup of sweet iced tea. At this moment, he saw Bishop Electra enjoying some red wine over there. Unlike the Church of Storms and the Church of the God of Combat, clergymen of the Evernight Goddess were prohibited from excessive drinking. They needed to reject distilled spirits, and they could only drink champagne, beer, and red and white grape wine in moderation. "How is it? This should be your first time holding such a grand ball, right?" Electra smiled as he raised his cup. Klein smiled and replied, "Very troublesome, and it's also, the biggest problem is that having so many dances in a row is exhausting. I kept sweating and wanted to drink more water. Bishop Electra chuckled and said, "When you're here in Backland, don't slack on any physical exercise. At times, the social scene is more tiring than you can imagine." With that said, he said with a jibing smile, "Ma'am Oria has endorsed you, believing that your character matches your appearance." I'd like to thank her for her endorsement. Klein was momentarily unable to find the words to reply with as he replied in a jokingly manner, "A person's character cannot be identified from a single dance." Without waiting for Electra to reveal a smile that all men understood, he switched to saying, "Your Excellency, I've recently involved myself in some business, and I'm afraid that I might offend a gentleman in power. I'm a little worried." He was referring to the Coim Company and Baron Syndra's. Electra took a sip of red wine and said, "Don't worry. Backland follows the rule of law. Besides, the goddess will bless you." "That's relieving. Praise the lady." Klein seriously drew the crimson moon on his chest. After Electra headed for the dance floor, his gaze darkened as he sighed silently. He wasn't feeling fearful or hatred. He just felt a slight guilty conscience. Up to this point in time, the Church of Evernight had been good to him. Although money was the reason, they had provided him plenty of help to the point of providing him some protection. Yet, he was planning to deal with the keepers, as well as contemplating how to steal something from the core seal behind Channy's gate. "Sigh, if this plan takes too long to complete, I'd really need periodic psychological treatment. Otherwise, I'll have some mental problems." Klein monitored his emotions as he shook his head indiscernibly. In an apartment in Sherwood Borough, Zio came home with Faina Potter pies and Daisy Bay sweet iced tea. As she put it on the dining table, she said to Forbes, "Don't eat too much of such food. It's unhealthy." "Why do you say that?" Forbes picked up a pie stuffed with fruits and ham before taking a bite. "I read about it in a magazine. As a bounty hunter, maintaining one's figure is a necessity." Z hesitated for a moment before pulling a pie to her mouth. For scoffed, "You're a Beyonder geared for combat, an extraordinary bounty hunter. There's no need to bother about maintaining your figure. Perhaps you might have missed out on your final opportunity to grow taller as a result." "Oh right, I heard that the warrior pathway has an effective way of raising a person's height. It's obvious just from looking at those barbarians from Fasak." Zio was taken aback as she suddenly sighed. "But I was born as a half-arbiter. I have no way of becoming a warrior." Clearly, she had seriously considered it in the past. Realizing that she had triggered her friend's memories, she acted as though she hadn't said a word as she focused on having her late dinner. After they were done eating and clearing up, Force pulled Zio into her bedroom and cleared her throat. "You've helped me tremendously, so I plan on giving you a present." "What troublesome matter do you need help with this time?" Zio touched her short blonde hair warily. Force blinked as she suddenly reflected on her recent behavior. She chuckled dryly and said, "This is for the past, the past." Without waiting for Zio to reply, she took out a metal box under Zio's doubtful gaze, one that was used to store cigars. "I don't smoke," Zio said with a shake of her head. Force tersely answered as she opened the box, revealing a translucent hexagonal pillar that was light blue in color. Zio's gaze froze as she looked at the luster that streaked inside the crystal like lightning as she instinctively asked, "Interrogator?" "Yes, a participant at a Beyonder gathering was selling it cheaply. I was afraid of missing the opportunity and hurriedly bought it," Force said the complete truth. "As you know, I've recently been rewarded by my teacher because of something just a while ago. I'm not lacking in cash." Zio knew that her friend had been out recently, claiming that she was doing something for her teacher. However, she found it unbelievable that she could so easily buy her an interrogator Beyonder characteristic as a gift. This was completely unlike her original lifestyle. Is she still gambling, having earned large sums of money after becoming an astrologer? Or did she finally cast her sights onto a bank vault and used her door-opening powers to rob the cash inside? Many guesses flashed through Zio's mind, but she wasn't able to find the corresponding proof. About 2 to 3 seconds later, she made a decision. She was to randomly pretend to head out 2 days a week, and she would secretly observe what Fours was doing. If it wasn't for her trust in her friend's character and bottom line, she would have suspected that she had become the mistress of a powerful beyonder or tycoon. It's too valuable. Zia waved her hand in an attempt to reject the gift. Fours had already thought of the excuse as she said with a smile, "I'll have matters to trouble you with in the future. Just treat it as an advanced payment. We are good friends. There's no need to talk about payment." Zio hesitated for a second as she said with a shake of her head, "I was waiting for you to say that." Fours immediately smiled and said, "Then treat it as an early birthday present. Don't you reject it. But my birthday is more than half a year away." As Zio muttered, she eventually reached out and took the interrogator beyonder characteristic. Sunday afternoon. Zia repressed her excitement and anticipation as she headed out as per normal. She planned on heading to a specific spot to leave a corresponding mark to schedule a meeting with the masked man from Me9 at some secluded alley. After obtaining the interrogator's beyonder characteristic and having digested her sheriff potion, all she needed was the correct formula to advance to sequence 7. It would be a crucial step for her investigation of the truth and restoring her family's honor. Therefore, she was eager to receive a few more missions from the military to accumulate the amount of contributions she needed. After doing all of this, she planned on circling East Borough first to see if there was any important news. Then she planned on returning home to Tail Fours so that she could figure out what her good friend was up to or if she was in any danger. However, the moment she entered East Borough, she had a hunch that someone was staring at her. 822 dazed instances. Who is it? As a sheriff, Zio had a sharp intuition for monitoring others and for being monitored by others. Her heart tensed up as her mind raced to consider what had just happened. In the past 2 to 3 weeks, she hadn't encountered anything particularly noteworthy. The few criminals she apprehended weren't beyonders, and they were, at best, related to certain gangs. No one would offend a famous bounty hunter in East Borough for them. Therefore, she quickly narrowed down the list of suspects, and she vaguely guessed at the spy's faction. A member from the Aurora Order. I didn't attend Mr. X's gathering and an accident happened. Apparently, it was quite a stunning scene. The person from Me9 said that Mr. X was assassinated on the spot and had his corpse taken away. Furthermore, the assassin had used powers at the demigod level. Is the Aurora Order investigating the possible culprits? Every invitee is in their sights. Although Zio was careless and short-tempered at times, her thought process was relatively direct. But in similar fields, she had a strong intuition that allowed her to figure out the crux of the matter. And on the matter regarding Mr. X's assassination, she had once been thankful that Fours had stopped her from attending, thus avoiding the accident. On the other hand, she felt that there wasn't anything wrong about her, allowing her to stand up to the scrutiny of any investigation. Therefore, when she met the masked man from Me9 last week, she had been frank and confident, and she had accepted the mission to investigate the truth behind the matter. Unfortunately, she wasn't sure which other beyonders had participated back then, and she had no clues to kick her off. That man from Me9 said that the members of Aurora Order are either lunatics or potential lunatics. You can't use common sense to guess at their actions. Even if they believe that there's nothing wrong with me, they can kill me in passing to vent their anger as a warning to the real murderer. The stressed Zio walked forward as she revised her path in East Borough. This new route allowed her to obtain the help of friends at any time. If she suffered an ambush, there was a considerable chance that she could escape or kill the assailant. As she walked, Zio's mind suddenly went into a daze, as she realized that she had unknowingly arrived back at her residence in Sherwood Borough at some point in time. Zia entered blankly and drank a cup of water when she was patted on the shoulder by Forbes. "Accompany me to East Borough." Zia was taken aback as she found herself saying something very familiar. "You want to head out to gather material?" Forbes immediately said that it wasn't the case, indicating that she had previously accepted a mission to find the dust left behind after a ghost faded away. As the deceased had been given a send-off by the priests at the cemetery to their respective deities' kingdom, there wasn't any ghosts. Thus, they could only head over to East Borough to find targets. Zio hesitated and said, "Can't you push it back a day? I'm planning to participate in Mr. X's gathering." Forbes immediately wore a bitter look and said that she had delayed it by too much, and the mission's deadline was looming. Zia sighed and agreed to accompany her friend to East Borough to find a deceased person that had just died or one that hadn't been discovered after a period of time since their death. Just as the two were about to exit, Zio felt the wind strike her in the face as she trembled and snapped awake. She saw a wandering poet sitting in a corner, playing a 7-string guitar as he sang a folk song that was famous in the southern villages. Zia frowned slightly as she rubbed her temples. She had a nagging feeling that her mind had gone adrift, but she couldn't remember what she was thinking about. She continued maintaining her vigilance as she followed her originally set route, entering a bar that sold lunch. On the way, she met an East Borough resident who would occasionally provide her with intelligence. He was a man who was either 23 or 24 years old. He had thinned his brows and his brown hair reached his shoulders. His facial features were rather soft and he had put on cheap makeup. He gave off quite an odd vibe. "Sherman, did anything happen in the past few days?" Zio greeted. According to what she knew, this young man named Sherman had always thought of himself as a woman. However, fate had played a terrible joke on him, making him a man. This made him suffer serious levels of ostracization for many years. Sherman grinned and said, "It's been peaceful. No man offered to buy me any drinks." "Drinking is bad," Zio advised him seriously, walked past him and walked to the bar counter. Sherman spat as he walked to the entrance, swaying his hips until he arrived at the condominium he rented. He paused at the door for nearly a minute before walking 2 steps to the side and knocking on the door next door. The wooden door creaked open as a low, female voice sounded with an undeniable sweetness to it. "Have you made your decision?" Sherman walked in and closed the door behind him. Looking towards the bed, he said to the black-dressed lady, "I'm still doubtful. I don't believe that there's something as magical as that." To him, the lady had a round face and a gentle and refined temperament. Not only was she sweet-looking, but she also had a different air to her. She was extremely charming and alluring. Of course, to Sherman, he was more envious instead of smitten. The black-dressed lady replied with a deadpan expression, "Haven't you seen the picture of my former appearance?" Her gaze moved as she couldn't help but feel a sense of melancholy. "But that might have been your twin brother. I find it difficult to believe that there really is a substance to change me into a woman," Sherman said in a wavering tone. The black-dressed lady chuckled without any humor in it. "Then you can pretend that it's fake. You may leave." Sherman's hands tightened as he fell silent for a long while. I'm willing to give it a try. Although I know that you might be bluffing me, I still wish to give it a try." "Then, what should be the price I need to pay?" "Listen to my instructions and help me do certain tasks. Don't worry. They will definitely be things you are capable of," the black-dressed lady said. "To truly change your sex, you need to drink 3 potions and complete certain rituals. I'll guide you." Upon saying this, she said in a self-deprecating manner, "You can consider your female name." At night, in the Backland Bridge area, in a small alley at Iron Gate Street, Zio stood under a street lamp that had been shattered by someone. She was recounting what had happened in the morning. After confirming that she wasn't being tailed, she returned to Sherwood Burrow and secretly observed Fours. She discovered that her friend didn't head out at all, staying at home like she usually did. She spent most of her time reading novels, newspapers, and magazines. She also drew the curtains in her room for nearly an hour, as though she was familiarizing herself with her Beyonder powers. Until she had nothing to do, she got a piece of paper and spent 15 minutes writing the opening to her new book. Finally, she tore it apart, crumbled it into a ball, and threw it into the trash can. She smokes and drinks excessively. Zio silently clenched her teeth when she saw a figure in a black suit walking out of the shadows from the other end of the alley. The man was tall and wore a golden mask that revealed his eyes, nostrils, mouth, and cheeks. He was none other than the Me-9 member who was in contact with Zio. "Is there anything urgent?" he asked directly. Although Zio was short, she said in a similarly domineering manner, "I was tailed in East Borough. I suspect that it's someone from the Aurora Order. They seem to be investigating what happened during the gathering." The topic Zio had prepared to talk about was about someone she was asked to look for. She planned on using a clue that couldn't be confirmed to make a request for the emergency meeting to appear normal. However, she now had a more suitable excuse thanks to the Aurora Order. The lunatics from the Aurora Order are like that. Although they know that we're also investigating the matter and are finding them, they don't shrink back. If it's not because of that, they wouldn't always be suffering setbacks, the golden-masked man said with a laugh. To be frank, I'm very surprised that they didn't directly surround you and bring you to a secluded place to interrogate and channel your spirit. Zio was about to answer him that the Aurora Order member didn't tail her for long when she suddenly recalled the dazed feeling she found inexplicable. Hence, she deliberated and mentioned, "I'm not sure what I encountered. For a very brief period of time, I seemed to be in a daze and can't remember what I recalled." The golden-masked man fell silent. After nearly 20 seconds, he said, "The investigation pertaining to you should have ended. The importance the Aurora Order has placed on this matter has exceeded my imagination. I will report this matter." You mentioned that many Beyonders received the invitation but didn't attend." Zio nodded and said, "The participants of each gathering doesn't exceed a third of the number of people invited. This is mostly normal for a gathering. It's not an exception for Mr. X's gathering either." The golden-masked man considered for a moment before asking, "Are there any clues about the person I got you to search for?" "The person whose original name was Trissy." Zio shook her head after seeing him nod. "Not yet. She's likely experienced." The golden-masked man immediately chuckled. "The number of people she has killed is more than the number of bounty missions you have completed. If you have any clues, make sure not to approach her. She's highly dangerous." Zio tersely answered and focused on the main topic at hand. "Is there a new commission? Why have you suddenly become so proactive?" the golden-masked man asked in surprise. Zio frankly replied, "I'm almost about to save up enough points to exchange for the interrogator potion formula. I wish to obtain it early." "Actually, there's no need for that. You can directly exchange it for the potion, as it will save quite a bit of points," the golden-masked man suggested in Zio's behalf. "I already have the Beyonder characteristic." Zio shook her head and said, "That would still take a very long time. I might be able to buy the ingredients at other Beyonder gatherings." The golden-masked man didn't insist as he said with a laughing sigh, "I wish you luck. This time it's a rather complicated commission. If you can complete it, you should have enough points." Zio held back her delight and asked, "What's the mission?" The masked man said with a slightly odd tone, "Take note of the people Viscount Stratford interacts with and list them down in a report before submitting it to me. There's no need for you to frequently monitor him. Whenever you are free or walk past, take note of it in passing. Trust me, you aren't the only one working on this mission. As long as you hand over a report of certain value a week, it'll be considered as you contributing a certain amount." This can be repeated every week. Viscount Stratford. Zio suddenly fell into a daze again, but this time she knew why. This Viscount was the captain of the Royal Guards. He was once her father's deputy.